Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first session of the Inclusive Entrepreneurship webinar series at the Diversity Institute. My name is Joy Wang, and I am part of the research team at DI. I will be moderating today's webinar, which is titled Spotlight on Diversity, Immigrant Entrepreneurship. This webinar aims to explore the challenges and opportunities of immigrant entrepreneurship in Canada. On a more focused level, the webinar will also examine the inclusion of immigrant entrepreneurs in succession planning of small agricultural businesses. In doing so, the webinar will discuss the role of policy, community support, and networks in enhancing the success rates of immigrant entrepreneurs. Today's discussion will provide valuable insights for policymakers, support organizations, entrepreneurs, and academics interested in fostering a more inclusive entrepreneurial environment for immigrants. We are lucky today to have Dr. Wendy Cukier and Dr. Francine Schlosser here to lead today's webinar. Dr. Wendy Cukier is a professor of entrepreneurship and strategy, as well as the founder and academic director of the Diversity Institute at Toronto Metropolitan University. She is the co-author of the bestseller Innovation Nation, Canadian Leadership from Java to Jurassic Park, and former VP of Research and Innovation, and more than 200 articles on aspects of diversity, inclusion, and innovation. Dr. Cukier is one of Canada's leading experts in disruptive technologies, innovation processes, and diversity and inclusion. The Diversity Institute has more than 100 research staff and projects, including Diversity Leads, which has tracked the representation of women in leadership roles, and a host of projects focused specifically on women in technology. The Diversity Institute has also pioneered innovative projects, such as the Advanced Digital and Professional Training Program, also known as ADAPT, the Women Entrepreneurship Knowledge Hub, and the Newcomer Entrepreneurship Hub. Dr. Cukier also leads the Women Entrepreneurship Knowledge Hub and a program of research for the Future Skills Center, as well as the new Inclusive Innovation and Entrepreneurship Network. Dr. Cukier has received many awards for her work. Is that okay?
Joy, it's long enough. People can read the
Okay.
bios. We don't have
No
tons
worries.
of time, so
All right.
apologies.
All right, so I'll get right over to Dr. Schlosser. Dr. Francine Schlosser is a professor and Odette Research Chair of Entrepreneurship and Innovation at the Odette Business School at the University of Windsor. Dr. Schlosser's research contributes to understanding how educators, employees, migrants, and employers can stimulate entrepreneurial readiness and innovative, knowledge-based strategic involvement and manage mid and late career transitions. From 2013 to 2018, Dr. Schlosser held the University of Windsor's Golden Jubilee Professorship at the Odette School of Business for Research Excellence. Her articles have been accepted for publication in top academic journals, including the Journal of Organizational Behavior, Human Resource Management, Organizational Studies, Human Resources Management Journal, Journal of Small Business Management, and the Journal of Managerial Psychology. She focuses on the development of innovative, work-integrated, and multinational experiential core student learning opportunities. For more than 15 years, she has engaged students with the Windsor business community through multidisciplinary venture teams and consulting projects. Dr. Schlosser was the executive director for the University of Windsor's Entrepreneurship Practice and Innovation Center from 2016 to 2019, and worked collaboratively to establish a multidisciplinary entrepreneurial culture. So without further ado, I would like to invite Dr. Cukier and Dr. Schlosser to get us started.
That's great. Thank you so much, Joy, and apologies for that very long introduction. That just confirms that I'm very old. So I wanted to first welcome you all and say thank you very much for joining. Also to say that we will be following up if folks have additional questions. I think there are some entrepreneurs in the audience that may be looking for more information on entrepreneurship, and certainly we are able to pass that on to you as well. The team will be happy to do so. Before we get started, I did want to say that I'm joining you from the traditional territory of the Mississauga of the Credit, the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabeg, the Chippewa, and the Wendat peoples. And it's important for us to acknowledge that the work that we do is very much framed in a commitment to truth and reconciliation. And as some of you know, the university has changed its name to Toronto Metropolitan University, in part as a result of that journey. So I'm going to try to be brief, which is always a challenge for academics, and give you some highlights of the Inclusive Innovation and Entrepreneurship Network research results, which are part of a SHIRK partnership grant and highlighted in some forthcoming reports, and including edited edition of a book. I think that Joy has already given you a good overview of the Diversity Institute, so I'll jump through that. And I really want to do some context setting. We have a series of sessions on different aspects of entrepreneurship with a diversity and gender lens, and it's important to set the context. First off, one of the things that we've really highlighted in our research is the importance of being clear about your definition of entrepreneurship. Historically, for example, when we looked at official data, there was a focus on majority owners of small, medium enterprises with at least one employee. And that is certainly an important segment of the entrepreneurship landscape in Canada, but it represents about 10% of entrepreneurs. Most entrepreneurs in this country are actually self-employed. And why that's important is because we know that often self-employment is a pathway to majority ownership of a business. We also know that immigrants are more likely than the general population to start businesses, and we can talk about the reasons for that. We also know that they create almost a quarter of new businesses in Canada. And when we talk about self-employment, it's important to recognize there's a very broad range of entrepreneurs counted there. So the definitions matter. And we've got interesting data pulled from Stats Canada on the percentage of business owners within different age groups, and looking at incorporation versus self-employment. When we think about immigrant entrepreneurs in Canada, it's also important to take an intersectional lens. And what that means is that immigrants are not all the same from a variety of perspectives. Obviously, they differ in terms of age and education and sector, but we also see that there are huge differences based on ethnicity, on language, on race, and on gender. So what we try to do is look not just at immigrant entrepreneurship as one thing, but break it down and consider the experiences of different groups and different sectors. And Dr. Schlosser's research will drill down into a very particular segment of immigrant entrepreneurship. We also see that not only are immigrants more likely to own small, medium enterprises than Canadians, but they represent a higher percentage of self-employed Canadians. And it's important as well to look at the full range of sectors. So we don't just consider tech entrepreneurs, which tends to be the stereotype that people associate with entrepreneurship. We have to think about owners of restaurants and entrepreneurs in hospitality. We have to think about people at all ends of the spectrum. The other thing that the research suggests is that innovation is somewhat higher among firms owned by immigrants, and there's other research that associates diversity with innovation and indicates, certainly our book indicated that people who are on the periphery are more likely to be innovative and entrepreneurial because they have to be. And so there's some new data on different kinds of innovation among entrepreneurs, and it does suggest that process innovation is higher. There's also data, this is old now, and we're hoping for some updates from Stats Canada, that net job creation is higher among immigrant-owned firms. And I thought it was interesting that Peace by Chocolate, which was founded by a Syrian refugee in Antigonish, is now the third biggest employer in that community. We also know that because of marginalization and often exclusion from employment or wage gaps, we see more immigrants in the gig economy. And again, the gig economy can include software engineers, but it also includes people who are delivering for Skip the Dishes. Research on financing, interestingly enough, is showing that the gap between immigrants and Canadian-born entrepreneurs is starting to narrow in terms of the approaches. But we do know that immigrants face more obstacles, partly because of embedded bias in, for example, the 5 C's that financial institutions will use to assess risk. Immigrants, even from the United States, face barriers because they don't have Canadian credit scores, for example. We see challenges in accessing government programs. There's been lots of work recently on the Startup Visa program and the implications of that, good and bad. There are grants and financing that are available to immigrant entrepreneurs, and particularly those who are racialized. It's important, again, to note that, for example, if you look at the Black community, 60% are immigrants as well. So programs targeting the Black community also serve a substantial number of immigrants, but often newcomers in particular have challenges navigating those programs, figuring out how to pitch their applications and so on. So there is a bit of a disconnect between the programs that are available to support racialized people and entrepreneurs and the ability to access those programs. We also see that when it comes to newcomers, there are higher percentages of business owners who are STEM graduates. And that's different if we look at 2nd and 3rd generation. When we look at the ethnic origins of immigrant entrepreneurs, India leads with 10.7%. The Philippines are next, then China and United Kingdom. And again, if we unpack this, there are huge differences in the kind of enterprises that people from South Asian countries are likely to engage in versus the Philippines, where you see more concentration in care industries. And it's interesting to note that when you intersect this with gender, what you will see is that in the South Asian community, women account for almost 50% of entrepreneurs, and that's compared to about 20% in the general population. So we're digging in more on these issues as well. And this intersectional approach, where we look specifically at issues around gender and immigration and entrepreneurship, I think is a very interesting area to consider. One of the special advantages that immigrant women entrepreneurs bring to our economic growth and development is they're more likely to export than others. And there are huge opportunities, in my view, to leverage that knowledge and that expertise by linking newcomer women entrepreneurs with Canadian-born entrepreneurs in order to try to accelerate export opportunities. And when we, as I said, when we dig into specific segments of the population, for example, looking at Chinese entrepreneurs in Canada, they're far more likely to either be in partnerships or majority owners of businesses. And again, lots of data to dig into that we don't have time to talk about. Historically, there's lots of research that suggests that many immigrants choose self-employment or entrepreneurship because they're excluded from other forms of employment. And this is undeniably true, but it also creates problems because that is not the whole story. Others are pulled into entrepreneurship, and 2/3 of immigrants who enter self-employment, for example, want to be self-employed and will turn down other jobs. one of the challenges we have in Canada is the settlement agencies tend to see entrepreneurship as failed employment as opposed to seeing it as an opportunity. So I want to leave time for obviously Francis and for questions, but there is lots of research that talks about the barriers. And one of the things that we're focused on in IIENet is taking an integrated approach to creating an inclusive environment, which looks at our assumptions, our stereotypes, celebrates success, looks at the processes and practices within organizations in the ecosystem, whether we're talking about VCs and biases that are built into expectations around pitches, whether we're looking, and the example there is often incubators and accelerators use Dragon's Den type competitions, which are very culturally specific and also tend to favor men with a certain kind of self-presentation. And so really digging in to where bias exists within the organizations in the ecosystem that are there to support entrepreneurs, including government programs, and ensuring that we tackle bias there. And we've got lots of research to look at each of these steps. We've done quite a lot of work with funders, for instance, to look at how you create inclusive program design to support the full range of equity deserving groups, including newcomers and racialized populations. The other piece that we can talk more about are programs that are designed for immigrant entrepreneurs, how the competencies need to be understood and defined, but also how we have to think about wraparound supports. And there are a lot of different programs across the country that are starting to target newcomer entrepreneurs at different stages of their development. So from our perspective, the implications are that we need more disaggregated data and research that considers intersectionality as well as specific contexts like rural entrepreneurs, like entrepreneurs in agribusiness. We have to look at policies. We have to have more rigor in our competency frameworks, and this applies to post-secondary institutions as well as others who are providing training. We need to ensure that the people that immigrants are dealing with understand what a great opportunity entrepreneurship is and provide appropriate supports. We have to assist with navigation and wayfinding, and we really have to celebrate success in order to shift the narrative. So thank you very much. And I think I'll hand it over here to Dr. Schlosser, and we'll take questions at the end. But as Joy mentioned, you can type questions into the Q&A. So over to you.
Thanks, Wendy. I'm not sure what people are seeing right now, but I do have my camera on, and I'm going to try to share my screen. When I share the screen, it looks like I can't also keep track of what's going on unless you see like the list of what I'm looking at. So I'm going to turn off the chat and the Q&A for now and just go through my slides. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you, Wendy, for inviting me to join this webinar. This is something that we've been working on for quite a while. My colleagues, Dr. Jerry Kerr, Deborah McPhee, and Marcia Carvalho de Azevedo, we have all been intersecting on this topic for a while. Probably about 8 years ago, Deborah and I started thinking about succession planning. We noticed a lot of the businesses in our areas where she was from St. Catharines, obviously, I'm from Windsor. And we noticed a lot of businesses were starting to close and there weren't successors for them. A lot of small businesses, well, all small businesses, their value and assets are wrapped up in their businesses. And so if they sell their businesses at a low rate or they just close them up without selling, they do lose part of their retirement income. So we're looking at that aspect of it, especially as the population was aging. And this is pre-COVID. Before people started saying, hey, maybe I want to retire. And before businesses started having major problems, throughout the pandemic. So we had started to develop some research on this looking to build out a plan to build a program that might match immigrant entrepreneurs with, building with businesses that were going, that were retiring, business owners that were retiring. And at the same time, I had a student who was, and his wife, who had bought out an older couple's business, two businesses, the wife and the husband's business. And they were extremely successful because they'd spent a whole year being mentored by this older couple. And then they came in with their new ideas, the young couple, and really changed some of the way that, services were delivered. And they've done very well through the pandemic. So all of that started to resonate with us. And when I met Dr. Azevedo, it's also very clear in Brazil that they're having the same issue in terms of the youth successors to businesses, and in particular to agriculture and farms. They're moving into the cities. So we're seeing the same thing in Canada. And so that's why we started to look at this in talking with Wendy Cukier. She also suggested, maybe you should focus on the succession planning for agribusiness, because this is a really dire situation. So this is how we kind of all came together to start talking about this very important issue. And this is kind of a first look at it. So we haven't collected our own data, but we have been searching for case studies online. We've been looking at other, research that informs what we're doing. And we're hoping that eventually we can find some partners, maybe some agricultural associations or farming associations, that even chambers of commerce, that we could work with in the future to maybe build out some kind of a matching program. So with that, I'll start talking a little bit more about what you came to hear about. Oh, wait a minute. Why isn't that working? I'm sorry about that. Let's try that. It doesn't appear to want me to go to the next slide. So what I'm going to do is I will just leave it. This doesn't look so nice, and my apologies, but I will try once more to see if I can progress.
Sorry. I think you're on the last slide, so you might have to scroll up to go back to the first slide.
Maybe I am on the last slide. Thank you so much.
No worries.
Okay. Let's get out of here. That's because my last slide is the same as the first slide. This is what I teach my students, is you always have to have your contact on the first and the last slide. Yeah, that's strange. Okay, so we are actually facing an agribusiness crisis in Canada. I don't think a lot of people realize this yet, because we don't really think about where our food comes, except that we do want it to be local. More and more, people want to have local food. But Canada is the 5th largest exporter of agri-food and seafood in the world, with exports in 2021 of nearly $82 billion. And it's delivered to 200 countries. And it's also ethical, because as we know from looking at some of the information that's coming out, for instance, about China and the seafood industry in China, there are so many ethical questions that really aren't a part of how Canada is managing their own, agri-food business and seafood business. So it's in high demand. The industry is responsible for 1 in 9 jobs in Canada, and in 2021, it employed more than 2 million people throughout Canada. And in Windsor, Essex, and St. Catharines, it's an even larger percentage. Windsor, Essex has the largest percentage of greenhouses in North America, and it's second in the world only to the Netherlands. So it's an important business in southwestern Ontario and in the prairies especially. Economists have reported that 40% of Canadian farm operators are expected to retire by 2033. And 66% of producers, like many small businesses, don't have a succession plan in place. So there was a recent report that the Royal Bank of Canada put out. That's an excellent report. You can find it online. And they identified that this is creating a real critical need for Canada to recruit 30,000 immigrant farmers to take over family farms. And immigrants, if you remember, are coming into Canada at a rate that is actually decreasing the age of Canada. And so there are many reasons, but even that alone will tell us. So our research question stemmed from some of the research. We looked at the background information that was out there in different fields. We noticed that the agricultural information is quite separate from the entrepreneurship field. And there was, a lot of research on family business and succession, even on agribusiness succession, but there was nothing pretty much on agribusiness succession transfer from domestic farmers to immigrants. And so for us, we were very interested in this question from both a practical point of view, as I've mentioned, and also from an academic point of view. So we were looking at what are the barriers facing immigrant farm succession in Canada and how can stakeholders support them? So this is conceptual right now that we're talking about. So as most of you probably know, Canada is one of the world's most welcoming nations to immigrants, if not the most welcoming nation in the world right now. We are welcoming 500,000 immigrants each year. And right now we have over 900,000 international students studying in Canada. And many of those, yes, will be potentially impacted by recent announcements about international student caps, but many will not. Like at the University of Windsor, for instance, most of our international students come in undergraduate programs. So we don't have as much of an effect at the university level, than at the college level is much more affected by the caps. But currently, there's almost 1 million international students studying in Canada. And in 2022, we welcomed 970 new permanent residents who immigrated to fill jobs in the agricultural sector. And those included 155 leaders, 530 agricultural service contractors and farm supervisors and specialized workers, and then 285 general farm workers. And in addition, of course, we have thousands and thousands of temporary workers who work in the agricultural sector. So our current situation for family farms, it's changing. So the definition of a family farm is rooted in a settler philosophy. It's a colonial type of an idea, right? It's like, go west, young man, or come to Canada, come to the States, you can own your own land, you can get away from what happened in Ireland, where you're serf, or in some of the other European countries. You can come to Canada and build out a place for yourself and grow your own food and live a good life for your family. And it was generally, a heterosexual white couple, and then their kids would take over. But that has changed a lot. As we've started to see many more immigrants coming in, of course, we're seeing different colors, and we're seeing different types of people who are deciding to be out and build an agricultural career in Canada. We're also seeing many more migrant workers who are essential to being able to perform the duties on the farm that other Canadians will not stand in line for. And there's a lot more technology now too. So there's a different definition of a family farm. There's more of an idea about sustainable practices, that there's a variation in sustainable practices. It's not just about eat local. There are lots of different ways of running your land. So that's changed. The land is really expensive now. We just saw a report last week. Southwestern Ontario, we're up 13% this year. That's a really big implication for young farmers, because if you own your property and you have 3 children, how can one actually buy out the family farm from the others? So how do you get your value for all of your children? It becomes a very challenging succession plan. There's been more and more large agribusiness acquisitions, especially linked to digitization and technology. And farmers are getting older, right? So you saw the stats before. Farmers are getting old, and yet they want to remain involved. So they're becoming more interested in leasing arrangements. And this opens up an opportunity for mentoring and potential eventual land acquisition by newcomers to Canada. There are also international students who are being employed out on the farms because they've been working, they've been allowed to work 40 hours the past year, and now that's going to be going away. So they will be working maximum 20 hours will change. And we also saw that higher educated migrants are likely to leave the agricultural sector. And that tells me they're leaving it because there is no career path in the agriculture sector to actually move up and own your own farm and lead your own farm. So what makes an immigrant agribusiness successful? When we looked back at some of the case studies online, because there are lots of immigrants that are featured online by the media. For instance, even that piece by Chocolate, you see that in the media, all the articles, and then it's a movie, and now everybody knows about them. So it's the same thing with other businesses. There are a number of profiles. And these were some of the predictors that seem to be, of their success: the knowledge and experience in farming, access to funding, because of course this is an expensive proposition, mentoring, because our land is different than, other countries, right? So when you come to Canada, you can't just grow the same crops. Maybe you can grow some of the same crops and bring some of your ideas, but you can't do it right away until you actually know more about the type of land and the weather conditions and that type of thing. Family support is extremely important for immigrants in any business. Any study I've done has involved family support. And then a knowledge of Canadian culture, regulations, business, and languages. It's a mire of taxation and regulations. It's a very difficult thing for immigrants to wrap themselves around. So the ecosystem and regional actors. When we started conceptualizing this, we looked at post-secondary institutions and what's their role in preparing international students and other students for agribusiness. And you can see that there are certain post-secondary institutions, for instance, University of Guelph, that are preparing for new types of green technologies and climate change, sustainable farming. They're preparing young farmers and increasing interest. Farm owners in the regional farming community, there are ways they can be involved through mentoring and through associations, support. Government policymakers, of course, make the policies that either make it impossible to own a farm or assist you. And then, of course, we have the international students and immigrants who must be involved in the ecosystem as well. So currently we have support programs at the provincial nominee level. So immigration, of course, is at the federal level in Canada. So provincially, though, different provinces can choose to support immigrants in certain areas. And so we profile Saskatchewan and Ontario. They have their own nominee programs that are aimed at bringing in immigrants, fast tracking their permanent residence status and return, but they require a ton of money. So you have to have $500,000 and then put up a $75,000 bond, basically. So that's out of reach. Picture yourself as a Ukrainian refugee. You were a farmer, because many Ukrainians who are here are farmers, and maybe they're going to stay here now instead of going back to the Ukraine if their territory is uninhabitable right now, or perhaps unachievable, or occupied by another force. So they may choose to stay here. And there's a farming community in itself with actually a similar climate. How could they ever afford to actually purchase a farm here? There are other relevant programs I wanted to point out that surround food sustainability and community support. Certainly with Black Canadians, there are some really interesting ones that might be talked about in the following webinar after this, which focuses on Black entrepreneurship. And there are also Indigenous agriculture and food systems initiatives, although that was a policy that the intake is closed on now. I'm sure that they will open up that one again. But these are streamlined for certain groups. And I think that streamlining pieces for certain types of newcomer farmers who have experience might be worthwhile. So our current systems right now, they only partially support newcomers. They require a huge financial investment. International students now have to make a huge investment before they come. They pay 4 times as much to go to school. They have to have money up front to support them. themselves. So I'm not sure where they would be able to find the initial investment in a farm. And there is some screening for immigrants experienced with farming, and this is extremely important. There has to be more screening because that's a huge predictor of success. There's no formal mentoring, and yeah, and I already talked about that. So moving toward a regional and workable solution, there has to be a way that these regional actors work together, and the key stakeholders really must develop a finding and matching map, because it's very difficult to find businesses that are ready to sell. And that's what we found with our other succession planning research, is businesses don't like to tell people when they want to sell. So it's really about the brokers in between, the realtors and the brokers, and the confidentiality that might make a difference for farmers who want to sell, and finding then the matching immigrant who we can support in different ways. So we were looking at trying to develop a program, a matching program using action learning. And this is something that we'll develop out in a chapter in a book that Wendy Cukier is editing and will be coming out this year. And we would also like to move forward with actually doing some research that will shape a new program that would help Canadians and help new Canadians be successful in our agribusiness sector, and make sure that it remains sustainable over the future years for all of Canadians. So thank you very much. I'll leave time for questions now.
Sorry, perfect. So now you can access the Q&A, Francine, and there was a request for some clarification around your reference to us being second largest after the Netherlands. So that question is from Dana. I don't know if you can, off the top of your head, provide that, or perhaps she can follow up with you.
Yeah, you can find that online. It's I'm sorry, I don't have the reference off the top of my head for that one, but that's well known.
And Dana also is asking, have there been any efforts to create agri-tech programs to expand productivity and efficiency in farming?
That's actually a really great question, Dana. So most of the technology in the greenhouses especially is Dutch, like almost all of it. And so, you know, the Dutch have their conference every year that you know, people in that software and hardware business would go to. So I think there have been some moves to try to change that. I know that Guelph has a number of initiatives, University of Guelph, but I know the University of Windsor is also building out more in terms of the agri-tech and the partnership piece. We've hired a director of partnerships in our Office of Research, and they've been actively trying to connect the greenhouse ecosystem to, you know, the researchers in terms of, you know, sensors and all the different types of technologies and sustainable pieces. So there are moves, but it's still dominated by Holland.
Yeah, and just a couple of points on that. One is often agriculture is overlooked when we talk about innovation, but in fact, it's one of the biggest users of Internet of Things now. And there's an OECD project looking at rural innovation, which is really important. And the only other thing I think is interesting is when you do a gender analysis, what you will see is agriculture is associated with men, gardening is associated with women. And so now there's a lot of technological innovation around urban gardening, and I'm on the board of a couple of organizations that are moving that technology forward. And as it becomes more technologically intensive, you're seeing more men involved in gardening. But the gender overlay to the farming and agriculture discussion is really having a big impact on agri-tech. Are there any other questions? I'm just looking in the I'm looking in the Q&A and I don't actually see any more, but I'll give folks another minute if there are any questions. Otherwise, we're basically at time. So any last comments, Francine?
No, I'm just looking. There is a report here prepared by Horticulture Section, Crops and Horticulture Division of Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada in December 22 on greenhouses that Dana might be interested in looking up. Okay, and I think there's another question here, Wendy. Or is there? Do you think more work needs to be done in Canada to popularize this issue? Oh, actually, I totally agree with you, Bradley, that there should be more work done, period, to popularize agriculture as a field, as a cool field for people to go into, young people. And that's why, like, the post-secondary education is really important, that they bring in more programs on agritech and agribusiness and promote that as an interesting field that young people can make a difference in, because it's got a lot of really important things like local food sustainability, community, and that seems to be very popular with the millennials and the newer generation. So it should be really promoted in a way to try to bring youth across, whether they're immigrants or domestic, to involve them more in the farms.
Very good question, Bradley.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. So just quickly, there's a question about nonprofit women entrepreneurs, and the answer for us is, when we look at definitions of entrepreneurship, we don't really distinguish between social and nonprofit. I do think that we are pretty much out of time, but the team will take all the written questions and we'll make sure that we, in our follow-up, we'll provide the presentations. We'll provide, obviously, some questions for you. And where there were questions we didn't get around to answering, Joy, Cassandra, and the team will make sure that Francine has a chance to provide a written response. So back to you, Joy.
All right, thank you so much, Dr. Schlosser and Dr. Cukier, for joining the session. I hope you found it all educational. And yes, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to the Diversity Institute. So our next session on Black entrepreneurship is just taking place right after this. So if you plan on attending that, we hope to see you there. And if not, we'll see you at the next session on Indigenous entrepreneurship. Have a great day. Thank you.